Could you give me an example of something you've seen?
Sure. I mean, I remember exactly there's just a lot of clothing being manufactured.
Okay, so you have seen some clothes being manufactured. You can't say that it's cotton or not cotton or anything in the product itself.
So how many hours a week do you think is an appropriate number for a shop floor worker at a supplier for Shein?
I don't think it's for me to judge what's appropriate. What we're saying is
you are the General Counsel for Europe, the Middle East, and the whole of Africa. So I probably would say it probably is appropriate in your elevated senior position within the organisation to make comment on what an appropriate. Would you say 50 hours a week is?
Agreements, but Michelle, I have to say, for a company that sells £1 billion to UK consumers, and for a company which is seeking to float on the London Stock Exchange, the committee has been pretty horrified by the lack of evidence that you have provided today. You've given us almost zero confidence in the integrity of Sonia Schumann.
Going back to Shein, you said you do site visits, is that correct? For your manufacturing sites, is that correct?
So particularly the auditors, they would do on-site audits.
Have you done any visits?
I have visited, yes.
Okay, that's good. So when you've gone to visit, what products have been in those manufacturing sites?
Garments, like clothing.
Okay, so can you tell me what type of clothing?
Perhaps a variety of clothings, usually, because depending on the size of the facilities, could be many things that is happening.
Could you give me an example of something you've seen?
Sure. I mean, I remember exactly there's just a lot of clothing being manufactured.
Okay, so you have seen some clothes being manufactured. You can't say that it's cotton or not cotton or anything in the product itself.
Yeah, like I said, I'm only able to see clothing being manufactured, and there could be different types.
Okay, so I'll move on. In the latest Sustainability and Social Impact Report, you reported 2 cases of child labour in your supply chain. How confident are you that your supply chain is child labour free?
Thank you. That's a very, very important question, and indeed it's a very serious issue. So with respect to those, well, I guess it's not just about those 2 suppliers, it's about preventing child labour in the supply chain in general. First of all, I think it's important to stress that not only we work with the suppliers to prevent that and take remediation actions, we've also tightened the policy. So previously, the policy was on immediate remediation violations, but now child labour since October 2023 is one of the immediate termination violations. Not only that, we have programs in place to help to educate the suppliers. There are training programs, there are notification being put out, but also have more robust system, help them to have more robust system internally to help to prevent that. It is also worth highlighting, while as the child labour as a definition in different countries, the laws might be different, but the standards in our policy is 16 years old, which is higher than the International Labour Organization standards.
How many suppliers have you now terminated a contract because there's been a suspicion or there has been evidence of child labour in that supply chain?
I'm really sorry because that's actually quite granular level of details. I do not have the specific information on how many suppliers have been terminated, but what I know, as mentioned, is one is it's an immediate termination violation now. By saying that, we also have a responsible exit program, i.e. we do not just terminate the suppliers, we do an impact assessment. We look at how much Shein's business is to that supplier, how many people they employ, and we'll help to ensure there's a smooth transition if they are terminated.
Can you provide the committee with some evidence of places or people that companies that you've been working with that haven't worked well because of child labour, because you said you're collecting this data, so can you present that data to us?
I'm able to check, because I understand the question is how many suppliers we have terminated for child labour issues, and I can certainly check on that data. But I think it's also important just to know there is a robust system, because it's not just about 1 or 2 suppliers, it's about systematically ensure this does not happen again.
And the cases that you agree that there've been, how long was child labour been continuing in that service?
I will have to double check on that level of detailed information. My understanding, at least, is first of all, both the underage labor, I would say, they are 15 years old and like 9 months or 11 months respectively. And my understanding is there was, not being either the ID paperwork or whatever, there's a mix-up. Therefore, when it has been identified, within a few days, the arrangement has been put in place to ensure all the remediation actions were taken.
Would you be able to supply that to us if that's okay?
Yeah.
You're saying it's only a couple of days that child labour was taking place.
I don't know how many days that they have been working in the factory. I don't have that level of granular details, but I can certainly check. Sorry, just for logistical question, would I be liaising with the clerk afterwards about the follow-ups?
Don't worry, we know where to find you. We will write to you. Anything further? No. Or is he writing briefly?
Thank you. You've both, in the previous questions, you've spoke about your suppliers or your retailers. How confident are you, or how much detail do you know about your suppliers or retailers outsourcing to smaller suppliers and smaller retailers? And the audits that you conduct, do they audit these outsourced factories? For both, so whoever would... Yeah, if we want to start with Shein.
Okay. So for the suppliers, generally, I don't think they systematically outsource as a starting point. And we do work with many small to medium-sized suppliers.
Sorry, when you say they don't systematically outsource as a starting point, can you confirm what that means?
Just to answer the question, because I think there, as you mentioned, you're saying, are we checking where they outsource to? So I believe my understanding is there's limited outsourcing. The suppliers themselves, generally, they are already, because I think the second question was more about they're outsourcing to smaller businesses. I think to begin with, many of the suppliers, there are small to medium businesses. We work with them, we have worked with them over the years to ensure robust systems are in place, they're trained. Out of all the, close to 4,000 audits that have been conducted, there are over 600 audits are indeed around upstream suppliers or packaging suppliers, or in the occasional sort of contract, as you mentioned, like outsource, perhaps equivalent. There is a level of audit there. I understand.
Right, just to come back to the question. So, do you believe that your suppliers are outsourcing their manufacturing?
As mentioned, I don't know to what extent there is the outsourcing. My understanding is generally when we contract with them, they are the one who's producing the products that we order from them.
You could onboard and audit a factory, but they could go on to use another factory and you wouldn't know. And you
I think they would have their upstream suppliers, for example, either packaging or material and so on. What I was trying to say is we audit some of those as well. Now, I understand it's an industry-wide challenge as to how far you go on the supply, on the entire level of supply chain, how many levels removed. We require all the suppliers, first of all, to comply with our supplier code of conduct, but also whoever they buy things from as well. And I think it is worth taking a step back just to say the supply chain due diligence is not, at the moment, in many countries, a mandatory obligation. What we do is trying to already meet high international standards, and we voluntarily carry out these regular audits and this level of supply chain due diligence.
Okay, Mr. Reynolds.
Thank you, Chair. Shein's supplier code of conduct says that suppliers are told they need to arrange working hours responsibly. What does that mean?
I think working hours and pay and so on, they're all part of the supplier code of conduct, and it's very important for the suppliers to adhere to whatever the legal requirements.
What do you mean when you say to arrange working hours responsibly? What does it mean?
All the working hours need to comply with the laws and regulations where the suppliers are based, and also they need to be compensated and paid appropriately.
How many hours a week do you think is an appropriate number for a shop floor worker at a supplier for Shein?
I don't think it's for me to judge what's appropriate. What we're saying is
you are the General Counsel for Europe, the Middle East, and the whole of Africa. So I probably would say it probably is appropriate in your elevated senior position within the organisation to make comment on what an appropriate. Would you say 50 hours a week is?
I think in different countries there are different maximum hour and rest period and so on, detailed provisions, and the laws do vary in different countries, and there are also International Labour Organization standards. So what we require the suppliers to do is to comply with our code of conduct and policies, and also to ensure they comply with the local laws as applicable.
So in 2022, a Channel 4 investigation found that a manufacturer being used by Shein in China had employees working 18-hour days with 1 day off a month. And in May of last year, a BBC report, a fresh report, found that some workers were still working 75 hours a week. Is that appropriate? And do you think those two specific instances agree with your supplier code of conduct?
Well, I don't recognise the specifics of those what you just described. As mentioned, the working hours and the overtime and the rest, those are all set out as requirements for the suppliers to adhere to, and it's definitely part of what's being audited. And for suppliers, I believe there are suppliers that had been terminated due to a combination of factors, including excessive overtime.
You talk about suppliers being terminated then, and you made comment to supplier termination, immediate termination violation was the words you used. But your sustainability and social impact report says if one of your suppliers is caught to be paying below the minimum wage, it, and I quote, requires immediate improvement. Surely paying lower than minimum wage doesn't just require improvement, it requires immediate termination.
So the immediate, I believe paying below the minimum wage is one of the immediate remediation violations, i.e. they need to fix it within 30 days.
I can quote from your sustainability and social impact report, which says requires immediate improvement. That's the wording.
That's why it's one of the immediate remediation violations, i.e. if they don't fix it within 30 days, then they will be terminated.
Would you not argue that breaking the law by paying less than minimum wage doesn't just require fixing it, but requires saying this is a business that we no longer want to work with, and so they should be terminated?
So first of all the suppliers do need to comply with the laws and regulations as applicable to them, and if they breach the law, there will be consequences.
Well, there aren't, though, are there? Because you're happy, and as you've said, that you're happy that if one of your suppliers breaks the law by paying below minimum wage, you think they just need to fix it. You don't think that an appropriate sanction is to say you're not appropriate to work with us. Do you think the correct message to give across is that Shein does not think that breaking the law as a supplier requires you to not work with them anymore? Is that appropriate?
I think breaking the law is there will be consequences that's associated with breaking the law. From an ESG standpoint, and it's commonly accepted principle generally, is because there are many very severe impact on many people, as I mentioned a little earlier, there are very serious matters that we have moved into immediate termination violations for actions where if the suppliers can remediate, because that's also about impact to the society in general, to the employment opportunity, to the individuals who are employed by that employer. This supplier will certainly be subject to very severe scrutiny, and they will be one of the higher risk profile suppliers, will be subject to more strict audits to ensure that does not happen again.
Okay, Mr. Maynard.
Thank you. Just in terms of audit findings, you've got a rating from A to E. Some of the things that have been at the bottom end of that have been dormitories inside factories, child labour, etc. Would you like to say a little bit about what you would like to see stamped out. What other practices are you looking to get rid of over the next 1, 2, 3 years that you're uncomfortable with in your bottom DE category?
Thank you for your question. So I'll perhaps just take a little bit time to explain. So the ABCDE is based on the scoring system that the auditor works with, and there are different violations, and obviously means different points are deducted. Other than when we talk about the immediate remediation violations, immediate termination violations, obviously the consequences are different. It's actually a very long list of requirements the suppliers need to meet, and they're set there with clear definitions and penalties set out in the policies. For example, as I mentioned, the immediate remediation violations that include, for example, safety and working environment, or pay on time, or excessive working hours, and some other, whether you're giving appropriate protection or the tools, or the condition of the factory, and there are many factors. So there are different items that the supplier need to comply with, and there will be subject to different type of consequences or penalties depending on what the violation is.
Okay, but no particular red lines as to things that you're like, okay, within X years we need to get rid of this, and this.
I think you're focused on. Perhaps the way to look at this is the most severe ones are the immediate termination violations. So the suppliers, if they trigger the immediate termination violations, then they will be forced labor, child labor, as mentioned earlier, ethical issues, integrity issues. Those would be the immediate termination violations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that's been an extremely helpful evidence session. I think, to colleagues from Temu, I think there is some reassurance about some of your supplier agreements. But, Ms. Xu, I have to say, for a company that sells £1 billion to UK consumers, and for a company which is seeking to float on the London Stock Exchange, the committee has been pretty horrified by the lack of evidence that you have provided today. You've given us almost zero confidence in the integrity of your supply chains. You can't even tell us what your products are made from. You can't tell us much about the conditions which workers have to work in. And the reluctance to answer basic questions has frankly bordered on contempt of the committee. So I hope that we can bring some clarity to this matter as quickly as we can through follow-up correspondence. But for now, this concludes this panel. Order, order.